Bein Hamtzorim. Bein Hamtzorim means the period between the two afflicting days of Shiva B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. And you all know the basic story. And where I'm coming from, what I want to talk about and perhaps focus in on is how this reflects on us. Although that this is a very sad period, a bitter period, but nevertheless, to us, this should be a source of strength. The first thing is the fact that we here, 2,000 years after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, 2,000 years of exile, of being dispersed, being thrown around the world like waves in the ocean, still relate to it. To us, the destruction of Beis Hamikdash is as fresh as it happened yesterday. There is a klal. The Gemara says, "Chazoko al hameis shemishtakach min halev." That a person, God forbid, loses a parent, loses a very close relative, after a while, even if one who was very, very closely tied up with the person, after a while, mishtakach min halev, it gets forgotten from the heart. And this is what's called the chazaka. This is a rule. This is how the Rebbeinu made it. Why is that a fact? Because since that this person passed away, your relationship with that person, in fact, even if you think of the person, but in fact your relationship with that person has been distanced. This person is in a different world and you're in a different world. It says that Yaakov Avinu, when he lost Yosef, and he thought that Yosef was dead. And he continued to mourn him as if he lost him yesterday for 22 years. So the question is, how do you mourn a person for 22 years? The nature is that after a year, you lose the bitterness. Sure, you miss the person, you think of the person, you love the person, but it's not something that you feel the loss. So it says the reason for that is that Yosef, in fact, was alive. Yaakov thought that he wasn't alive. And this is why his relationship with him was alive, and he couldn't forget it. He was missing him like he's lost him here today. The Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed 2,000 years ago. The second Beis Hamikdash. The first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed on 2,500 years ago. And yet, we mourn, we feel the loss as if it is happening now. What does that tell us? It tells us that even though it was lost, the loss was only superficial. But in fact, to us, it's still alive and well, and we're missing it. Now, none of us have ever seen the Beis Hamikdash. We don't know what we are missing. None of us has experienced being with the Hamikdash, being in Korbanos. We don't know. As a matter of fact, we have a hard time relating to the whole thing. What does it mean we're missing the Beis Hamikdash? In principle, what it means is that Yidden cannot make peace with the Golus. Even though we are in Golus, as I said, for 2,000 years, and our great-great-great-grandparents were born in the Golus, and we're used to it. We're used to living in other people's lands. And yet, we still feel that this is not the reality, this is not the way it should be. Even in these blessed times now, where if you live in America and even in the whole world, Eden can live the way they want to live. Without knowing what it means, the Beis Hamikdash, we still have nostalgia for it. Because we cannot relate to Golus. What is the principle behind it? Why can't we relate to Golus? America especially. America is made up of many, many nationalities. You know, America is, there is little India, there's little Italy, there's little China, there's all kinds of different nationalities in here. And everybody, they feel quite comfortable. And America and Eden are also a nationality. Why do Eden feel out of place? Why do Eden say, no, we're in Golus? Why in Golus? You do whatever you want. You live the way you want. What this tells us is that without as much as knowing it and understanding what it is, we nevertheless recognize that there is a truth, there's a true world that is now not represented. This is not the way it should be. Even though I personally can do whatever I want, I can learn Torah and live my life whichever way I want, but the whole reality isn't real. This is not the way it should be. What is the reality that we long for? What is the reality that we're connecting to, that we're saying that we're missing for 2,000 years? There's a saying from the Barditchever Rov. You heard the Barditchever Rebbe, Rabbi Barditchever from Barditchever. Rabbi Barditchever was always defending the Eden. And he even had debates with Hashem about the Eden. So Rabbi Barditchever once said, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the world, I was speaking to Hashem. He says, what do you want from the Eden? You took the Yetzer Hara, and you took all the taivas and the whole world, and you put it in front of them. And the Gan Eden, and the goodness of godliness, and all the richness of real spiritual life, you put in a book. So what do you expect from them? He says, why don't you try to reverse it? Why don't you put the richness, the Gan Eden and godliness in front of them, and put the taivas and Olam Hazeh and all the enticements and interests of the Yetzer Hara, put it into a book. They should read about it. But in front of them they will see godliness. And then see what they will choose. See what they will choose. So this seems to be like it's good, right? This seems to be like, okay, it's an interesting argument, it's an interesting thought, an interesting dream. But we have to understand that this is precisely the situation that differentiates between the Golus and the time of the Beis Hamikdash. In the Golus, we see all worldly things. And our natural, what is the reality of the world? We see the Goyim, we see all the nations, we see how the world operates. Everything operates natural and natural rules, and everything in the world is all based on some kind of a physical interest, a physical satisfaction. Godliness, insight, truth is in the book. And we recognize, as much as we are simple and we don't understand, but internally we recognize, that's not the way it should be. That's not true. God created the world. If God created the world, so what should we see in reality? In reality, we should see the Creator. We should see the truth of the creation. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. And we should see a lowly world, a world that completely conceals godliness, a world that entices us, draws us into some meaningless form of life, whereas in fact it is God who created the world. And we say that the way it should be is the way it was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, where godliness was obvious. In the moment of the Beis Hamikdash, Eden actually experienced and they saw godliness. They saw Nisim, they saw everything. So this is not just what we saw and we would like to see it again. But because that the reality of it remains, the world is still God's world. That hasn't changed. Because we were driven out of Eretz Yisrael and the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the fact that this is God's world has not changed. And this is why we cannot give up. We still have this attachment. We still feel the loss even after 2,000 years. Makes no difference. Because only a mace, only someone, if someone is actually passes away and he goes into a different world, then we actually have a break in relationship. But that which is alive and well, we cannot break a relationship. That stays alive and well. And therefore we are constantly in limbo. We cannot acquiesce. You know what acquiesce means? We cannot accept the situation as is. No matter how successful and how well situated we are, we cannot relate to this situation as a reality. Now, this is true on the entire Jewish people. And this is also true in every individual Yid. Every Yid knows, he feels in himself that there is something not real about the world the way it is. Now, in our personal lives, in our personal avodah, personal effort, we are always challenged, and we have nisyonos, we have difficulties. And we have to get the strength from someplace that should carry us out through the difficulties and give us the strength to follow a correct path. Where do we get the strength to follow a correct path? If a person thought that the challenges of his life he has to overcome on his own, he is entirely alone, then he would feel very discouraged, because he feels, on my own, how can I overcome and go through the world? But in this, the Bein Hamtzorim, this period, the 3 weeks, where Ayid reflects that he himself, every individual, feels and recognizes that he connects to the Beis Hamikdash, he connects to the loss, he connects to the reality of the world the way it should be. That itself gives him a recognition that he is never alone, and he is not really carrying the burden alone. Because if he were alone, so what connection does he have to the Beis Hamikdash? This is 2,000 years ago. because that he is part of the Jewish nation. And therefore he has the full strength that the nation as such, the whole nation has. When he is challenged in his own life, he recognizes that the reason that he is challenged, the reason that I am in Golus is not only because I am in Golus, but this is the entire nation that's in Golus. The Jewish nation is in Golus. When a Yid, an individual Yid, has an nisoyon, has a difficulty in his life, and he has to fight it through, the reason that he has this difficulty is because he is in Golus. And the reason that he is in Golus is because the entire Jewish nation is in Golus. And this inyan, that the Jewish nation is in Golus, is, as we say, is an anomaly. It should not be. It's something that we don't accept. And we know for sure that this has to change because that's not real. It's not the reality the way it should be. This can be related to the Pasha of the week. In the Pasha of the week, Rosh Matoss, it speaks about Nedorim. Nedorim means vows. A person makes a neder. And what is the reason that a person would make a neder? A person makes a neder, usually, if he is a reasonable person, he makes a neder in order to safeguard himself against doing the wrong thing. When he feels that he is being drawn into some activity, into some action, to something that he shouldn't, so he makes a neder to guard himself against it. Nothing of a neder. And then there is the Chacham, the Rav, the Chacham, who is able to nullify the neder. So the Rebbe explains in the Sikha that what is the inyan of the Chacham nullifying a neder. What's going on? Reb Simcha. You're the Simcha? The Rebbe explains what is the inyan of nullifying a neder. If there is such thing as a neder, why should the Chacham be nullifying it? To be matir neder.
Mm-hmm. If I remember right, a Chacham phrases in nullification, he permits it.
Right, matir neder.
But the husband,
he can nullify. Yeah, but it's all. Yeah, that's right. That's correct. Absolutely.
It's kind of like different.
Yeah, but okay, fine. He is matir in that. But what is the point of this? So the Rebbe explains in the Sikha like this, that the point of a neder is that a person makes a promise, makes a vow, and by virtue of this vow, this will safeguard him against actions that he shouldn't do. Protection. When does a person need this special protection? One who has not yet trained himself to be able to control and to guide himself with his intellect, to know right from wrong. He's not able to keep himself online without extra assistance. He occasionally needs a neder. He needs to make a boundary and say, protect himself, this is not going to be done for different reasons than his intellect. I made a vow, I made a promise. If I transgress it, I'll be punished. But a person who has gone a little further in his avodah, and he has already developed his intellect, and he is able to direct himself and guide himself according to his intellect. He doesn't need external, this kind of external boundaries. He does nothing in that. This is exactly what the Rambam says, that a person should abstain from making nedarim. Instead, one should guide himself with his own understanding and abstain from that which you should not abstain, from which you should abstain, without having to make nedarim. This is the principle of a chacham, of the Rosh HaMateh, coming to be matir the neder. Why is he matir the neder? If the person made a neder and he felt that he needs a neder, why is the chacham come to be matir? Because the inyan of the chacham is to uplift and to raise the yid, to raise him up to the madrege where he doesn't need a neder, where he learns and he understands and he has the strength of mind and strength of character to live up to what is right. He doesn't need a neder to protect him. And then the Rebbe goes on and says that there is a third category. There's a category where a person needs a neder. There's a category where a person nullifies a neder, like a husband or a father nullifies a neder, which means there was a neder, but it was nullified. There's a third category where the neder is uprooted from, like a chacham that uproots a neder from the beginning. Uprooting the neder from the beginning means that this person, he is at the level where he knows exactly what's right and what's wrong, and he can actually use all things in the world for the right way. He doesn't need to even abstain, because he can do the right thing to start with. This principle that ultimately a yid not only does not need a neder to protect him, but even more, he does not even need to abstain from things in the world. Because to begin with, he sees the things in the world as they are in truth, as they are holy things, to be used only for holy things. Because he recognizes that the truth of the world is the way it should be in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. And then the whole neder is mutar melechatchila. It's totally useless, totally superfluous. Because as a matter of fact, the world that he lives in is a holy world, is a Beis Hamikdash world. And to begin with, he looks at things only from a holy perspective. And this is the point, that the Bein Hamtzorim, that this fact that we are remembering the Beis Hamikdash even after 2,000 years, and we're mourning for it, and we are waiting for its rebuilding, and we miss it. This is really a source of strength to us, because what this tells us is that the Beis Hamikdash is not really destroyed. Because if it were really destroyed, we would forget about it. We would not be feeling its loss. It's destroyed only superficially. That's halachically also correct. You're learning now Hilchot Beis Abchira, and you learn, I don't know if you're up to it, that the place of the Beis Hamikdash today is as holy as it was when the Beis Hamikdash stood. Did you know that? The place of the Beis Hamikdash today has the same holiness as when the Beis Hamikdash stood on it. This is why we're not allowed to enter, to walk in. There's the western wall. We're not allowed to go on the other side of the wall because that's the Beis Hamikdash. And a Tomei is not allowed to enter in that place. And we're all Tmeim, so we're not allowed to enter there. Because the Beis Hamikdash, the destruction is superficial only. But in fact, the truth remained the same. Not only is the truth remained the same, but we, and every Yid, recognizes it and feels it. We all know that nothing has changed. And therefore, even though we're in the Golus, only superficially. This is what the Rebbe said.
Not forgetting the Beis Hamikdash and the way it says before about vows and abstaining, and how with the Chokhmah you're able to go into the world.
In the case of the vows, and maybe the Rebbe explained that there are 3 levels. Mm-hmm. There's a level of a person who needs to make a vow to protect himself against the Yetzer Hara. There's a person who does not need a vow to protect himself, but he has to protect himself with his intellect. He has to watch out what he does and what he doesn't do, what's appropriate for him, what's not. He has to be careful. And there's a person who does not need to be careful because, to begin with, he regards the world in the proper way. He is not enticed by that which is not improper. And he partakes of the world. Everything that he partakes is always L'Shem Shamayim. He sees the world to begin with in the way the world is true, the truth of the world, that it's God's world, and he doesn't need to protect himself against it. I'm saying that this 3rd level, this is reflective of the time of the Beis Hamikdash. What's the time of the Beis Hamikdash? And we said the time of the Hamikdash is that the kedusha and the holiness is obvious in front of us. The Yetzer Hara is something that you read about in the book, but the kedusha is right there. In other words, the reality of the world is exactly the way it should be. You could see that God creates the world. You could see that it's the holiness in the world. You don't need to read in the book and say who created the world. It's obvious. And the important thing which I'm saying is that by the very fact that we still remember the Beis Hamikdash, and we're still mourning for it, and we recognize that we are not in the place where we should be, and that we are in Golus, and that's not the right place, that itself shows that the Beis Hamikdash is not in fact destroyed. And that we are connected to it. It's alive and well in our heart and in our mind. We spoke many times in these sessions. There are many times when the person gets a sense of an inspiration, an insight. And because it's just an inspiration, just an insight, it's not something concrete, he kind of dismisses it. He doesn't know, he doesn't believe that it's real. He says, oh, it's my own imagination. It's not the real thing. And I'm always pointing out that this is not an imagination. This is the real thing. These inspirations come from inside us, come from our neshamas. Because we have a neshama, despite the fact that we are in Golus and that we see a dark world, but we have a real neshama that's alive and that sees and knows the truth, the pure truth the way it is. And when we are learning the right things and thinking along the right way, we get an insight, we get an inspiration, which is a breakthrough of the light of the neshama, breakthrough of our insight of the truth. The same thing when we are sitting and we are reflecting the Beis Hamikdash, reflecting the way Jewish life was and is supposed to be, and what the world is supposed to look like. And we become inspired, we have nostalgia to it and say, oh, this is the truth, this is the way it should be. We have to understand, like I said, pointed out, that is the real truth. This is the way we really think. We really deep down believe that the world has to be a holy world. And we should get strength from these insights. We must learn and put these things in perspective and know what to do with it, and learn very carefully and know everything very concretely, not just superficially. But when we are learning and when we are struggling with the Aleph base, and we're struggling with the Ibra, we're struggling with the words, we have to know that these words carry and represent the godly truth in the world. And the more we struggle with them, the more we allow this truth to come through, and the more, both in our own lives and ultimately in the whole world. And this is why the Pasuk says, and the Rambam brings it down, that ultimately all the fasts, Tzim Horvi and Tzim Hamishi. Tzim Horvi is the Tzim of Tammuz, Shivos of Tammuz, and Tzim Hamishi, and then the Tisha B'Av, and Tzim Gedalia, and Shivos and Asor B'Tevis. All of these Ta'anesi, all of these fasts will be transformed into days of joy and celebration. Because we will recognize that the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of of Jewish land and Jewish life the way it should be, was only superficial. It was only temporary, for the purpose that we should be able to get it rebuilt in a more perfect way, so that the real perfection of the Beis Hamikdash will then show. It was never destroyed. This is what the Rebbe said. I started saying. The Rebbe said, "Let all the nations," the Frierdiker Rebbe and Rebbe Rashab, "let all the nations know," the Rebbe said, "that we were sent in Golus, but only our bodies were sent in Golus. Our neshomas were not sent in Golus. Our neshomas were not sent in Golus." What does that mean? That from the perspective of our neshama, the perspective of who we really are, we're not in Golus. We're in Eretz Yisrael, we're in the Beis Hamikdash, and we are alive and well. And as every word that we learn, we connect back to that truth of the Beis Hamikdash. We may not recognize it. We're learning, we're struggling with words, with letters, and with translations. It seems to us that we are struggling on one spot. But in truth, these words that we're struggling with, these words have a real neshama in them. They have a real life to them. Just like a person's finger is just a piece of meat, but this piece of meat has a neshama, is alive. And every word that we say, every word that we learn, has a neshama in it. The neshama of the Meibashon who gave us the Torah. And this is how we keep it alive, and we bring out the brightness and the life in the Torah, and in ourselves, and in the Golus. And ultimately, we reduce the Golus to nothing, and by learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, we ultimately will cause the revelation of the Torah Beis Hamikdash. That which we are missing, that which we are nostalgic for. So we should all be matzliach in our efforts. Never give up. And every word that you're struggling with, you're breaking through another little bit of Golus. Just like when you dig for gold, you dig, and all of a sudden it brightens up. This is the same thing. We should all have atzlacha in this.